Hey there folks, the #1 Boldy James fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Boldy James and RichGains record, Murder During Drug Traffic. Say what you will about Boldy James, but one thing is undeniable. He is a man on a mission, and that mission is to release as much music as humanly possible without it ever really dipping into truly terrible or offensively bad territory. I do think it's a legitimate shame, though, how the guy's reputation has kind of gone from really beloved, more underground-oriented rapper with records like 2020's Manger on McNichols being pretty definitive examples of albums universally agreed upon as modern classics within non-mainstream rap, to, within just a few years' time, a guy who's kind of known for just dropping a bunch of random collaborative projects at a pretty rapid-fire pace without really having much substance behind them. I mean, I don't think it's really fair to say the guy's ever put out a truly awful, horrendous record or anything like that, but at the same time, it's been a hot minute since he's really put out anything that I would personally say was worth calling truly great. I mean, throughout the entirety of 2023, he didn't really put out anything that was all that amazing. As a whole, 2024 was a fine year for him, I guess. And really, the last time we saw anything from him that was truly great was in 2022 with the back-to-back albums Killing Nothing and Fair Exchange No Robbery, both of which were collaborative records with Real Badman and, of course, producer legend Nicholas Craven, respectively. And now here we are in 2025, his first release for the year so far, with another one already planned in like a week as I'm filming and, editing and uploading this. And really, this record just leaves me with one question: why? I want to preface this by saying that in his best moments, Boldy James is one of the most interesting, distinctive rappers active today throughout the entire genre of rap as a whole, across all of its subgenres, all of its ranks of popularity. I really do think that some of his best work is among the best rap, period, that we've gotten throughout the entire decade so far. But with that being said, it has, again, become evident that he's sort of just tossing stuff out there and seeing what sticks, and that, very constant pace of releases has caused a lot of his records to feel significantly more thin than some of his better works overall, but never has that ever felt more true, to me at least, than it has here. I mean, this is a record that really sees him retread a lot of territory that he's gone over time and time again on much better records throughout his discography, and I mean that in more ways than one. I mean, I suppose it's really just a matter of what you want to talk about first. I mean, his flow here isn't really that different from anything else that he's put out within the last couple of years, nor is his lyrical style. And while both of those are absolutely fine and pretty strong overall in a general sense, repeating those styles, those flows, that songwriting style constantly from record to record means that it's gonna get old after a while, and that doesn't even inherently mean that it has to be bad on any given record that you put out in the modern day, but it does kind of mean that if the album itself doesn't really back that up well, it just kind of ends up falling apart, and I feel like that's what happens here. But for James himself, I just feel like he doesn't bring anything new or interesting to the table here, and I think that's absolutely a shame. One could argue that their prior collaboration, Indiana Jones, back in 2023, was a similar example of that. RichGains and Boldy James coming together on a record to make something that just felt like an unnecessary repeat of things James had done in the past. But I feel like at that point it hadn't become quite as painfully evident that he wasn't really taking the time to develop a more fleshed out and more sonically dynamic record, either of them, in this situation. And here, now on Murder During Drug Traffic, it just kind of feels like everything's being tossed together from a lyrical perspective. James kind of treading over the same topics of crime and hedonism that he always has without really presenting them in a new light or delivering them in a way that makes this record feel unique from any of the other, dozen records that he's released within the past year and a half, 2 years. It just feels painfully unremarkable, which is a shame because the guy has proven himself to be one of the most distinctly talented rappers within that particular niche of rap, but that just doesn't really shine here, and it doesn't really shine on any of his recent records, considering how old and how, in some senses, dry a lot of the topics that he's going for here have become to him specifically. Now, to provide a bit more context for this particular collaboration, Murder During Drug Traffic is, as I stated, not the first time that Boldy James and RichGains have collaborated as rapper and producer, respectively. They originally first collaborated on a full-length project project in the form of 2023's Indiana Jones, which received lukewarm reception at best. I never really saw anybody talk about it. I wasn't even aware of its existence until well after it originally dropped. And as a whole, it seems like the general consensus is that it's one of the weakest projects that either have ever been a part of, specifically James, who's known for his collaborations at this point. It's just not a project that's really beloved by seemingly anyone for the most part. Not necessarily saying it's considered one of the worst rap albums of the decade so far or anything. We're certainly not stepping into like Tom McDonald territory here or anything like that, but at the same time, it definitely isn't an album that's particularly well liked. And it's interesting because you would think that a second collaboration would result in similar reception, or maybe even different reception, because the artists in question would change up their dynamic to work together in a different way that would provide a different sounding project. And while I feel like this record does sonically manage to differ from Indiana Jones, it manages to still get the same reception, which I just find kind of fascinating that both things happened at the same time. The James RichGains collaborative team here have changed up their sound slightly to feel a bit different from their prior collaboration, yet it still seems universally agreed upon that there's just not much going on here. Truly amazing, quite impressive even. And again, while James's performance on Indiana Jones wasn't like super praised or anything like that, it did seem like one of the bigger complaints that people had about that record specifically was the fact that RichGains' production was just not that great, and I'm inclined to agree with that criticism on that record, and I'm inclined to bring up that criticism here, as, again, I think that RichGains is just a very weak producer on here. You could argue that the whole minimalistic aesthetic of this record is a, intentional design rather than a bug, but at the same time, it just feels like this record is so ridiculously bare bones at points that rather than trying to create some sort of atmosphere or anything like that, it just ends up highlighting how quickly put together this record feels like it was. Just a slapdash album with beats that lack any sort of dynamicism, and in turn just feel kind of one note and repetitive, especially when James, someone with a pretty intentionally monotonous at that delivery style, is rapping over them and not really providing any sense of flair to those beats in question. I mean, I don't necessarily think that this needed to be some sort of massive chipmunk soul kind of project with some amazing, gorgeous samples and gospel choirs in the background or anything, but at the same time, I don't think it really would have killed either artist involved to make things a little bit more dynamic in one way or the other, whether it was RichGains maybe fleshing out the production here a little bit, or James really trying to kind of switch up his style as to not repeat himself too much from a rapper's perspective, but hey, what do I know, I guess. And while I just don't like RichGains' production style here from the get-go, I also feel like the biggest issue isn't even the fact that I don't really care for his production style, it's that his production style just doesn't suit Boldy James as an MC. I mean, the very acoustics-focused minimalism of a lot of this record here is so light and airy, and it just doesn't work with James at all, and it causes songs like Janky, Stacks and Flips, Days Go By to just feel kind of awkward at best. And I mean, it would be wrong to cite Boldy James as a one-trick pony in terms of the kind of beats that he can rap over. There is an undeniable grit and edge to what James does, generally speaking, and that means that he brings that to the table with just about every record he puts out, no matter what the instrumental style of the producer he's working with is. And that isn't something that ever really changes, and that means that jazz-influenced instrumentals, darker takes on a lot of chipmunk soul stuff that he's worked on in the past, classic-style boom-bap beats that are reminiscent of a lot of the 90s East Coast rap scene, those are all subgenres of rap, types of instrumentals that have been brought to him that have worked really well for him in a variety of contexts. So when you get the trap influences on a number of tracks here that feel inappropriate at best, or the extreme minimalism that doesn't really provide any atmosphere and just leaves everything feeling a bit bare bones, it just doesn't do any favors to a guy who has a pretty singular style and never really deviates from the norm that he's set for himself and has been setting for himself for a number of years at this point. It just ends up kind of leaving the entire record feeling a bit lifeless. All in all, though, I would say really the only actual bad part of this record are the features from people like Double D and Street Lord Juan. They're pretty objectionable at best, but those are pretty minor parts of the record that really don't show up that much until the last handful of tracks, and by then you're probably zoning out because the rest of the record was so boring up until that point. So I guess no harm, no foul in that regard. But as a whole, I just think it's a shame to see Boldy James get to this point where it just feels like he's putting out records for the sake of putting out records. It's disappointing because his career arc has been super fascinating to see. A guy who's been dropping mixtapes for like a solid decade before actually getting any sort of recognition from the underground scene. Mixtapes that really, to this day, no one cares about that much, unfortunately. And now that he's kind of gotten some degree of recognition, it feels like he's just resigned to putting out albums that have nothing to say from a lyrical standpoint or from a creative standpoint. And I think that really is a shame. The guy is extremely talented, and his best records are, again, beyond amazing. Truly phenomenal music. And I really do hope that we get another, again, strong, solid project from him in the near future. But the thing is, you know how at the beginning of this video I was like, oh, you know, I think at the end of this month he's dropping another project? Yeah, I looked in between like takes of this. It drops in 2 days. This album that I'm reviewing has only been out for like 2.5 weeks. Please, slow down. Unless the new album's gonna be great. Unless the new album's gonna be amazing. But I have my suspicions. It's not gonna be. For some reason. I'm going to give this record 2 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching the Infinite Jukebox, and I will see you in the next one.